Hello, everybody. This is Rachna, and I am here once again with yet another poem for you, and that is an ode to autumn. This is a wonderful poem written by a very renowned poet, John Keats. So, let's begin. Children, getting on with the poem, let's first understand our very own John Keats, our poet. John Keats, he was born on 31st October 1795 and he died on 23rd February 1821. Well, you can make out it's a very small time that he lived. So, he is very well known as a romantic poet in English literature. He was prominent in the second generation of romantic poets with Lord Byron and P.B. Shelley. Though his poems were in publication for only 4 years before he died of tuberculosis at the age of only 25 years. Well, you see, that's not a very long time for someone to get so famous as he did. But you see, what happened was that he wasn't very famous at the time that he lived. Okay, he was the critics of that time, they didn't receive him very well. But his fame grew rapidly after his death. So you see, this is something about our poet. Now, let's understand the poem. Children, before we get along with the poem, let's first of all understand what is an ode. You see, the name of the poem being an ode to autumn. So what does ode actually mean? You see, an ode is a short lyrical poem that praises an individual, an idea, or an event. You see, it is derived from a Greek word, aidein, which means to sing or to chant. Okay, so in ancient Greece, odes were generally accompanied, or let's say originally accompanied by music. Now, odes are often ceremonial and formal in tone. Alright? Now, if we look at, an ode with a view of a literary device, an ode is a form of poetry, which is a sonnet or an elegy. It is a literary technique that is lyrical in nature, but it is not supposed to be very lengthy, right? So if we look at this particular poem as well, it is glorifying autumn. It is speaking at length about autumn. Okay? It is telling us, what really autumn is supposed to mean for people. So, children, let's understand that To Autumn is the final work in a group of poems known as Yeats' 1819 Odes. Okay? Now, although, personal problems, they hardly left any time for for Keats to actually devote time to poetry. But he did finish this particular poem. It was the last of his works. And he composed it after a walk near Winchester one autumn evening. You see, children, the main theme of this particular poem are the power of nature, the passage of time, and the consolation of beauty. The power of nature, being the poem, in the poem expresses reverence and awe for the great changes brought by nature as autumn brings its riches to the landscape. This poem praises autumn, describing its abundance, harvest, and transition into winter, and uses intense sensuous imagery to elevate the fleeting beauty of the moment. So, well, let's understand this particular poem. Season of mist and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun, conspiring with him how to load and bless with fruit the vines that round the thatch eaves run, to bend with apples the mossed cottage trees, and fill all fruit with ripeness to the core, to swell the gourd and plump the hazel shells with a sweet kernel, to set budding more, and still more later flowers for the bees, until they think warm days will never cease, for summer has o'erbrimmed their calmly cells. Who hath not seen thee oft amid thy store? Sometimes whoever seeks abroad may find thee sitting careless on a granary floor. Thy hair is soft lifted by the winnowing wind, or on a half-reaped furrow sound asleep, drowsed with the fume of poppies, while the hook spares the next sought and all its twined flowers. And sometimes like a gleaner thou dost keep steady thy laden head across the brook, or by a cider press with patient look thou watchest the last oozing hours by hours. Where are the songs of spring? Ay, where are they? Think not of them, thou hast thy music too, while bared clouds bloom the soft dying day, and touch the subtle plains with rosy hue. Then in a wailful choir the small gnats mourn among the river sallows borne aloft, or sinking as the light wind leaves or dies, and full-grown lambs loud bleat from hilly bourne. Hedge crickets sing, and now they treble soft. The redbreast whistles from the garden croft, and gathering swallows twitter in the skies. Children, all in all, you have 33 lines in this particular poem. And instead of giving you a line by line explanation of this particular poem, I'm going to help you out a little with a summary and a few other details as to how is it that you can actually compare it, and so on and so forth. As far as the explanation is concerned, we're going to do that in the classroom. Alright, so here we go. You see, autumn, the season associated with mists and a general sense of calm abundance, like I said earlier. You are an intimate friend of the sun. This is what our poet has to tell autumn. He says that you are the one, you're the friend of the sun whose heat and light helps all these fruits and vegetables grow. You work closely with the sun to make lots of fruit grow on the vines that wrap around the roof edges of the farmhouses. You work to make so much fruit grow that it weighs down the branches of the mossy apple trees that grow outside the farmhouses. Together, you and the sun make every fruit completely ripe. You make gourds swell and hazel shells grow fat with a sweet nut inside. You make the flowers grow new buds and keep growing more. And when these buds bloom, bees gather the flowers' pollen. Those bees think your warmth will last forever because summer brought so many flowers and so much pollen that the beehives are now overflowing with honey. And then the poet says that who hasn't noticed autumn in the places where your bounty is kept? He says that any person who finds themselves wandering about is likely to find you sitting lazily on the floor of the building where grain is stored, and notice your hair lifted by a light wind that separates strands of hair in the same way a harvester might separate the components of a grain of wheat. So, here, children, you can say that he's comparing it to, he's imagining that it is a lady who's sitting, or it could be, a thresher sitting, or the harvester sitting. Could be anyone. Okay? So, anyone might also find you asleep in the fields on an incompletely harvested crop row, fatigued because of the sleep induced aroma of the poppies. In that case, your sachet, which you'd been using to cut the crops, would be cast to the side. It would just be lying there, and therefore the next section of the twisted flowers would be saved from being cut. Sometimes, autumn, you are like the agricultural laborer who picks up loose cuttings from the fields after the harvest. Like this laborer who has to be observant, you watch the stream with your full, heavy head of fruit and leaves. Often at other times, you patiently watch the machine that juices the apples for cider, noting how the juice and pulp slowly ooze out of the machine over the course of many hours. Now, in the last two stanzas, where the music that characterizes spring, for example, a bird song, you can say that, he repeats that, where is it? Don't think about the spring and its typical music. You have your own music. The background for your music is a scene in which beautiful shadowed clouds expand in the evening sky and filter the sunlight such that it casts pink upon the fields which have been harvested. Your music includes gnats which hum mournfully among the willows that grow along the river banks and which rise and fall according to the strength of the wind. It includes mature, fully grown lambs that make their baa sound from the fence of their hilly enclosure. It includes crickets singing in the bushes and a red-breasted bird that softly whistles from the small garden. And lastly, it includes the growing folk of swallows which rise and sing together against the darkening sky. Now, children, to understand a little more about this particular poem, let's think about it. Think about the theme where beauty and death could be together. Before we get into the theme, I would just like you all to understand that you must have seen or you must have heard me speaking as if you see I'm telling autumn the what it is. It's simply because if you go through this poem over and over again, you will feel that it is the poet who is actually speaking everything to autumn. And being an ode, I don't think that it would be justified if I, explain it or tell you about this in a third person. All right. So here, let's understand. Number one, that is John Keats is speaking about beauty of autumn. He's speaking about autumn as if it was lady. So here, let's understand that as its title would suggest, to autumn celebrates the bountiful beauty of the fall. Fall is another word for autumn. In this poem, autumn is a season characterized by a rich abundance of life. So, the culmination of weeks of summer warmth and sunshine, autumn sees trees overloaded with fruits, beehives dripping with honey, the thick vines trailing up the sides of farmhouses. So often the poem is taken to be no more than an ode of a lovely, life-filled time of year that is often overshadowed by spring and summer. And yet, running underneath this celebration of life is a sense of impending decay. Autumn's abundance is only possible because it comes at the end of the growing season. And all this well being exists on the brink of death. As winter approaches, fruits will rot, leaves will fall, and crops will be harvested. This doesn't diminish the loveliness of autumn, however, and instead suggests the beauty shines all the more powerfully in the moments before it will soon be gone. In a way, then death is just as much a part of autumn's loveliness as is life. Now here, the speaker, that is our poet, he envisions autumn as a transitional season that straddles the line between abundance and decay. Tree limbs bend under the load of their apple, while gods swell and the flowers are all set budding more and still more. Indeed, all of these images were close to destruction, were things to grow without end. Perhaps the tree limbs would break under the weight of their own fruit. The gourds would burst and the bees would drown in their calmy cells. So you see, more life would transform this beauty into something which is more drastic, right? This is one reason why we can say that, this particular poem, we can safely say that it is supposed to be a transition of beauty to death, or we can say that just before autumn we have summer. So the transition from summer to autumn, and then from autumn to winter, where you have a whole lot of snow, and it just kind of finishes everything which is there. If the winters set in and the harvest is not done, it is of actually no use. So this is where we see that the transition of beauty and death is. So let's understand a little of the literary devices here. You see, in the literary devices, you have the speaker or narrator and a point of view which is in the first person. Form and meter is an ode, like I said earlier. It has 3 stanzas of 11 lines each. There is a metaphor and simile, like, and sometimes like a gleaner, thou dost keep thy steady leaden head across a brook. The speaker compares autumn to a gleaner who carefully balances the leftovers from a harvest on his head while crossing a small stream of water. Then you have alliteration and assonance, like seasons of mist and mellow fruitfulness. There's a repetition of S, M, and F. While barred clouds bloom, the soft dying day, repetition of B, S, and D. Okay? Then you do have a little of personification, like sometimes whoever seeks abroad may find, or thee sitting carelessly on a granary floor, thy hair soft lifted by the winnowing wind, or on a half-reaped furrow sound asleep, drowsed with the fumes of poppies, while thy hook spares the next swath and all its twined flowers. Here the speaker personifies autumn through as a person sitting on a granary floor and as someone who picks poppies in a field. Then you do have hyperbole. For summer as o'erbrimmed the calmly sails. Keats, he exaggerates the amount of honey in the bees cells to express the excessive joys of autumn. Then you do have onomatopoeia, like then in a willful choir the small grass mown among the river swallows. The speaker connects the buzz of gnats to a choir, and full grown lambs bleat from holy bourne. Hedge crickets sing, and now with treble soft, the redbreast whistles from a garden croft, and gathering swallows twitter in the skies. The poem ends with numerous examples of onomatopoeia, from bleating lambs to twittering birds. So apart from that, you do have allusions, and of course you do have a climax, you do have a major conflict. The tone is understated and tranquil. The setting of this particular poem is the English countryside, the genre being an ode, a romantic poem. There is irony in this particular poem. So you see, you do have a lot of, let's say, literary devices which are filled in this poem. No matter how much I try and try to concise this particular video and think like I may have completed everything, but let us not forget that we're talking about an ode which is written by none other than John Eads. So it's really not possible to cover each and everything in this small video, because I wouldn't be able to justify. Another thing, there are certain literary devices which I have not explained, but yet I have explained things which are very important for my students. So with this, I come to the end of this particular poem. I hope you all have a wonderful time. Stay safe, stay indoors, drink a lot of water, do your breathing exercises regularly, as I have always maintained. Bye-bye.